The arena was a perfect circle of polished obsidian, gleaming under the cold, artificial sunlight of the warship's combat deck. Around it, the crew of the Cavani dreadnought stood in eager anticipation, their eyes fixed on the center of the ring. There, two fates would collide, one predestined, the other an act of sheer defiance. Commander Silve stood, her posture flawless, arms behind her back. Her long, pointed ears twitched imperceptibly, betraying the faintest sign of impatience. This was a waste of time. The human, what was his name again? Gabriel, had been captured during a skirmish on Drenos IV, a mining colony caught between warring factions. He should have been processed like any other prisoner, sent to the labor pits or executed for defying the Empire. But no, this human, this fool, had requested a duel for his freedom. It was laughable. A warrior's tradition, born from the ancient ways of her people, invoked by someone who could barely lift a blade. Silve had no respect for such desperation. The man was being unshackled now, his wrists freed with the kind of casual disregard that spoke volumes about his ignorance of the true stakes. Gabriel stretched lazily, rolling his shoulders, his demeanor annoyingly nonchalant, as if he had not just signed his death warrant. "Well," Gabriel said, rubbing his wrists where the restraints had been, "wasn't expecting a spa treatment, but I guess you don't do hand massages in captivity." A ripple of laughter spread through the gathered warriors. Some jeered, others smirked in amusement. Silve didn't flinch. Her kind valued wit, but they valued discipline far more. This was not a joke. This was a duel. Gabriel, however, seemed entirely unbothered by their mockery. His gaze met hers, with an intensity she found irritating. He wasn't afraid. Worse, he seemed bored, as if he wasn't the one about to die. She measured him with a quick glance. He was tall but lean, built for endurance, not brute force. His dark hair was unkempt, a stray lock falling across his forehead, and his face bore the faint scruff of someone who had spent too long fighting for his life to bother with grooming. His eyes, though, those eyes, they were sharp, too sharp. "Are you done stalling?" Silve's voice was smooth but edged with irritation. Gabriel flashed a grin. "Oh, is that what I'm doing? Thought we were just soaking in the atmosphere. It's not every day you get to fight on a spaceship. Nice place, by the way. Love the whole ominous war machine aesthetic." Silve arched an eyebrow, her golden eyes narrowing. She had him pegged now. He was one of those warriors, the kind that used humor to deflect, to throw their opponent off balance before the fight even began. A cheap tactic, one that would not save him. With a swift motion, she unclasped the fastenings on her combat tunic, letting the regal fabric of her overcoat slide off her shoulders. Beneath it, she wore the skin-tight armor of a duelist, designed for speed over protection. Her blade, a curved masterpiece of folded plasma steel, pulsed faintly in her hand as she activated its monomolecular edge. Gabriel's grin faltered for just a moment. He hadn't expected that. Reaching to the side, he was handed a blade by one of the ship's quartermasters, an older Cavani training sword, ceremonial rather than combat grade. No enhancements, no energy edge, just plain, old-fashioned metal. "You didn't request a more suitable weapon?" Silve asked, her eyebrows still raised. Gabriel tested the weight of the blade with a practiced swing. "Nah, this'll do." Silve almost pitied him. She stood across from him, her posture radiating the deadly calm of a master at work. The ship's commander, an elder warrior, scarred by decades of combat, stepped forward and raised his hand. By ancient rites, the duel must proceed. "Victory is claimed by surrender, incapacitation, or death," he intoned. "Begin," he said. The crowd went silent. Gabriel barely had time to set his stance before Silve was upon him. She moved like a shadow, fast and fluid, a whisper of wind that seemed to strike from every direction. The first blow should have taken him in the shoulder, a clean, decisive hit to end the fight before it had even begun. But then, miraculously, Gabriel twisted just in time, narrowly avoiding the strike. He stumbled but recovered with surprising grace. Interesting, Silve thought, her sharp gaze never leaving him. She pressed forward, her blade flashing in a flurry of rapid strikes, each one designed to break his balance, to force an opening. Gabriel blocked with the ceremonial sword, the clang of steel ringing out across the arena. He was fast. Not as fast as her, but quick enough. More importantly, he was adaptable. Each move he made was sharper than the last, as though he were learning from her strikes in real time. Silve's eyes narrowed. She'd fought hundreds of duels across the galaxy, against the finest swordsmen in the known universe, but none of them had reacted to her like this. None had looked at her as though they might actually survive. He blocked high, ducked when she struck low, and when she tried to feint left, he didn't take the bait. He wasn't just defending anymore. He was learning, adapting. He wasn't supposed to be this good. The crowd murmured now, their tone shifting from amusement to genuine intrigue. Silve's grip on her blade tightened. She wasn't done yet. She would finish this. With a renewed sense of determination, she surged forward again, but this time, Gabriel was ready. The moment she struck, he sidestepped, really sidestepped, his feet shifting with the precision of a dancer. She twisted the strike mid-motion, adjusting to his movements, but this time he was already one step ahead. He leaned in, just a fraction, and with a quick tap of his blade against her exposed arm, he hit her. The arena went silent. Silve froze. Her eyes flicked down to where his blade had touched her. A minor cut, a barely there wound, but it was a hit. Gabriel smiled that damn cocky smile of his. "That's one," he said, panting. Her golden eyes flicked up to meet his, and for the first time since the duel began, something shifted in her gaze. Not irritation, not even frustration, a kind of curiosity. "You're still standing," she admitted, her voice low, almost grudging. Gabriel wiped his brow, clearly winded. "Yeah, I surprise myself sometimes, too." The tension in the arena was palpable. What had started as an execution had become a contest, and Silve had underestimated him, but no more. The next strike came faster, more precise, sharper than before. She wasn't holding back anymore. Gabriel barely had time to react, his body screaming in protest as he blocked, parried, dodged. His mind was running on sheer instinct, adrenaline pumping through his veins. She was stronger, faster, but he was stubborn. He had survived worse. "Speak less," Silve murmured as she thrust again, her blade flicking toward his ribs. Gabriel sidestepped, barely managing to deflect it. The tip of her blade grazed his shirt, slicing through the fabric but not the flesh. He glanced down at the fresh cut. "Hey, that was my last decent shirt," he muttered. But Silve didn't take the bait. She had him on the ropes, but something was different. The way her eyes flicked to his, the way she adjusted mid-motion. She was starting to think. "Two," he said, panting harder now. Her ears twitched. The next strike came, and this time, Silve didn't just attack. She adapted, and Gabriel knew in that moment that the real battle had only just begun. The arena, once filled with the sound of clashing blades, now stood eerily silent. The air was thick with anticipation, the once laughing crowd now transfixed by the tension between Gabriel and Silve. The fight was far from over, but something had shifted. The scales, once tipped so clearly in Silve's favor, now felt more balanced, more unpredictable. Gabriel was breathing heavily, sweat dripping down his brow. His muscles screamed in protest, but he ignored them. If he stopped moving, even for a second, he would be dead. Silve, on the other hand, seemed to have no such concerns. Her breath was steady, her movements precise, like a predator circling her prey. Yet something had changed in her. Her eyes, once cold and calculating, now held a flicker of something else. Curiosity? Respect, perhaps? Silve's golden eyes flicked over him as she adjusted her stance, her blade steady in her grip. She didn't look like the same warrior who had struck with such lethal intent moments ago. She wasn't just testing him anymore, she was studying him. And that, more than anything, made Gabriel feel uneasy. He had no illusions about what was at stake. This was still a duel for his life. But it was clear now. Silve was no longer treating him like a mere obstacle to be crushed. He had earned her attention, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. Silve lunged again, but this time Gabriel was ready. His body had begun to move on instinct, his mind working in overdrive as he read her every move. She was faster than he could have anticipated, but he was learning, adapting. Her blade came down in a vicious arc, but he twisted just in time, the edge of her sword grazing past his ribs. The burn of the monomolecular blade was almost unbearable, but he powered through it. He couldn't afford to let his guard down now. "You're fast," he panted, his voice barely more than a breath. Silve's lips twitched, but she didn't respond. Instead, she pressed forward, each strike coming faster than the last, a blur of motion that he struggled to track. The weight of her presence, the raw power behind every movement, was like a physical force pressing down on him. He had faced skilled warriors before, but nothing like this. Silve wasn't just fighting him. She was breaking him down, forcing him to question every move he made, every instinct he relied on. But Gabriel had something she didn't: survival. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he had learned to outlast his enemies. He had fought battles with worse odds, fought people who outmatched him in every way, and he had survived. With a grunt, he sidestepped a particularly vicious strike, ducking under her blade and spinning around to land a quick tap against the back of her leg. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She hissed in frustration, the tip of her blade skimming his shoulder as she countered. But Gabriel had made his point. "Two," he said, grinning despite the sweat dripping down his face. Silve froze. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment he saw something flicker behind them. Not anger, not frustration, something deeper, something that made her pause. "You fight differently than any human I have ever faced," she said, her voice low and measured. Gabriel wiped his brow, the grin still on his face. "Is that a compliment?" "Because I'll take it." Silve's expression remained unreadable, but there was something in the way she held her blade, the way her stance shifted, that told him she wasn't finished with him yet. With a sudden surge of motion, Silve attacked again, but this time, something was different. Her strikes were no longer as predictable, no longer as calculated. She was improvising, adapting to his movements now, as if she were learning from him the same way he had learned from her. Gabriel blocked a strike to the side, feeling the force of it rattle his arms, but he wasn't thrown off balance. He pivoted, countering with a quick slash that sent her stumbling back. His heart was pounding in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he wasn't going to stop now, not when he had the upper hand. She recovered quickly, though, her golden eyes flashing with renewed determination. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Silve's movements became more fluid, more chaotic, but also more dangerous. She wasn't just trying to outlast him now, she was trying to break him. Gabriel barely had time to react. Every strike she delivered was faster, sharper, a storm of motion that threatened to overwhelm him. Her blade danced through the air, each move calculated to land a killing blow, but Gabriel was learning. He was adapting. He dodged, blocked, parried, and countered, all in one fluid motion. He wasn't as fast as she was, but he had something she didn't: a relentless will to survive. And just when it seemed like Silve might land the final blow, Gabriel found his opening. He feinted left, just like before, but this time he didn't pivot to the right. Instead, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His blade came up, a simple, unassuming strike, but it landed. This time, he didn't just tap her arm. This time, he wounded her. A small cut, a superficial wound, but a wound nonetheless. It was enough to stagger her. Gabriel exhaled sharply. 3, he said, barely able to contain his excitement. Silve's eyes flickered, a glimmer of something that might have been surprise. It was only for a moment, but it was there. Impressive, she said, her voice tinged with something he hadn't expected. Respect? Or was it admiration? He couldn't quite tell, but before he could savor the moment, she surged forward again faster than ever. The arena, the crowd, the tension, they all faded away. It was just her and him, two warriors locked in a deadly dance, each one determined to come out on top. Gabriel's arms were beginning to feel like lead, his muscles burning with each movement. His thoughts were a blur, but he kept fighting. He had no choice. 4, he muttered under his breath, knowing he had to finish this. Silve's golden eyes gleamed with something new now, something more dangerous than before. She was no longer just testing him. She was challenging him. And Gabriel was ready for whatever came next. The clang of steel against steel reverberated through the arena, but the sound was barely audible over the deafening rush of Gabriel's pulse in his ears. His limbs were heavy, his muscles on fire, but the fight wasn't over. He couldn't afford to slow down, not now, not when he was so close. Gabriel's eyes were locked on Silve, his opponent. No, his adversary, whose golden eyes gleamed with something far deeper than simple concentration. They had shifted, he could see that now. She wasn't just trying to break him anymore. She was studying him, assessing him, as if testing a theory. And for some reason, it made Gabriel feel like the duel had moved beyond a matter of life or death. It had become something else entirely. Silve's blade shimmered in the artificial light of the combat deck, her movements so fluid, so precise, they almost looked like they were happening in slow motion. Every strike was a statement, every movement a challenge. Gabriel, on the other hand, was the antithesis of control. His attacks were rougher, less refined, but everyone was born from necessity, from the fight for survival. He was still breathing hard, each exhale a heavy rasp in his throat. But he'd survived this long. That counted for something. And he wasn't about to go down now, not when he'd finally earned her respect. Silve pressed the attack again, her sword flashing in the air, aimed at his throat. Gabriel sidestepped, just barely avoiding the deadly arc. He felt the heat of her blade singe the air next to his skin, but he didn't flinch. His instincts had kicked in long ago. There was no thinking now, only surviving. His foot slipped as he shifted his weight, a fraction of a second too slow. The strike came again, and this time there was no dodging. The edge of Silve's sword grazed across his chest, the monomolecular blade cutting clean through his shirt and into his flesh. Gabriel hissed through clenched teeth, stumbling back. Blood began to stain the fabric of his shirt, but he refused to acknowledge the pain. Not yet. He had to keep going. 4, he breathed out, but his voice was a little weaker this time, his confidence starting to fray at the edges. Silve didn't speak. Her eyes, though, they told a story. There was something in her gaze now, something that had been absent when this duel had begun. She wasn't just testing him anymore. She was recognizing him, recognizing that he wasn't just another human to crush underfoot. She tilted her head slightly, as though considering something. Then, without warning, she moved again. This time it wasn't a strike of overwhelming force, but a subtle shift. Silve feigned a high strike, and as Gabriel instinctively raised his blade to block, she spun, pivoting to strike low. The move was executed with such fluidity, such precision, that Gabriel's defenses were overwhelmed. But instead of landing the final blow, Silve paused just inches from his chest. Her golden eyes met his, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to slow. "You're different," Silve said softly. Her voice was no longer cold, no longer detached. It was laced with something Gabriel couldn't quite place, something like respect, or perhaps even admiration. Gabriel's chest heaved with the effort of staying upright, but he managed a grin. "I've been called worse." Silve's lips twitched slightly, but there was no humor in it. She took a small step back, lowering her blade. The duel, for the first time, seemed to hang in the balance. Not because of the fight, but because of something else. Something neither of them had expected when they first locked eyes on the arena floor. For a long moment, the two of them just stood there. Gabriel could feel the crowd around them, their eyes fixed on the outcome, but he didn't care. Silve had stopped trying to kill him. She had paused. "What are you doing?" Gabriel asked, his voice low but steady. Silve didn't respond immediately. Instead, her gaze swept over him once more, analyzing him in the same way she had throughout the entire duel. Then, slowly, she sheathed her blade. "I'm done," Silve said, her voice almost contemplative. Gabriel blinked. "What?" She stepped back, looking over at the gathered warriors, her expression unreadable. "The duel is over," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just made an irrevocable decision. The crowd murmured in disbelief. The tension in the arena was palpable. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. This wasn't the clean execution they had expected. This was something else entirely. Gabriel's heart raced as he tried to process what had just happened. He wasn't dead. He wasn't even incapacitated. For the first time in the entire duel, he was alive. And Silve had just stopped fighting him. But why? The silence stretched on for a long moment, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Then Silve's voice broke through the stillness. "You fought for your freedom," she said, her tone colder now, more authoritative. "You have it." Gabriel's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" "I said, you are free," Silve repeated, her gaze locking onto his with an intensity that left no room for argument. Gabriel's mind reeled. He had come here to fight for his life. He had expected to lose. But now, here he was, standing across from a warrior who had just granted him his freedom. And he had no idea why. "Why?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Silve met his gaze, her golden eyes unwavering. "Because you proved yourself worthy. Because you didn't give up. Because you fought." Gabriel swallowed, feeling the weight of her words settle in. The gravity of what had just transpired hit him like a wave. He had won. Not by strength, not by skill, but by endurance. He had survived a fight with one of the greatest warriors in the galaxy, and in doing so, he had earned her respect. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, but Silve paid them no mind. She turned on her heel, her back straight, and began to walk toward the exit of the arena. Gabriel stood frozen for a moment longer, trying to wrap his mind around everything that had just happened. Then, with a deep breath, he followed. As they walked down the dimly lit corridors of the Cavani dreadnought, Gabriel felt the weight of the ship pressing down on him. The metallic walls were sleek and cold, the atmosphere tense with the lingering energy of the duel. He wasn't a prisoner anymore. He was something else, something different. But what? "So," he said, trying to break the silence. "What now?" Silve's ears twitched slightly, but she didn't look at him. "Now we leave." "Leave? Where?" "Home." Gabriel frowned. "Your home? The Cavani home?" Silve turned to him then, her gaze unreadable. "We are on a mission," she said. "But this war, this fight, it is no longer about winning. It is about understanding what we are truly up against." Gabriel's mind raced. "What do you mean?" "Not all enemies are defeated by strength. Some are defeated by knowledge." She paused, and Gabriel could see the change in her demeanor. The warrior was still there, but now There was something more, something thoughtful. "This fight, Gabriel, it is not over." Gabriel opened his mouth to ask more, but she silenced him with a look. Her golden eyes softened, just for a moment, and then she turned back toward the control room, her pace quickening. "Come, we have much to discuss." The air on the Cavani dreadnought was thick with tension as Gabriel followed Silve down the winding, sleek corridors. The ship hummed around them, its massive engines pulsating beneath his feet, yet the silence between them felt almost oppressive. He had won the duel. He had earned his freedom. But nothing in his gut told him this was over, not by a long shot. As they reached the bridge, Gabriel couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was unfolding, something beyond the fight. Silve's demeanor had shifted after the duel. No longer was she the cold, calculating commander, the perfect warrior who saw everything as a challenge to her strength. No. Now she was something else. Something more contemplative, as though the outcome of the fight had unlocked a door she wasn't sure she wanted to open. They entered the bridge, and the bustling hum of the crew around them paused for a split second, all eyes turning toward the commander. Silve stepped forward, her presence commanding the room even as she seemed lost in thought. Gabriel, standing behind her, felt the weight of every gaze upon him, but he didn't flinch. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. One of the senior officers, a grizzled veteran with scars tracing his face, turned from the controls. "Commander," he said, his voice low and respectful, "the distress signal. It's been confirmed. We are on course to intercept an unknown anomaly." Silve nodded, her golden eyes flicking to the star map at the center of the room. The holographic display shimmered with pulsating lights, and Gabriel saw a swirling mass of energy that could only be described as a rift. It looked like nothing he had ever seen, an endless void, dark and unsettling at the edge of known space. "We're close," Silve said, her voice calm, but Gabriel could sense the tension beneath it. She turned to him then, her eyes locking with his. "What we are about to face is unlike anything you've encountered. There are forces out there, far beyond anything the Empire has ever known." Gabriel's stomach tightened. He didn't know if it was fear or the undeniable pull of curiosity that gripped him. "What exactly are we looking at?" Silve didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to the officer who had spoken earlier. "Send the team to prepare," she ordered. "We're boarding it." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "Boarding? You want to go in there?" Silve glanced at him, her lips curling slightly. "You're free now, Gabriel. You don't have to follow us." Gabriel chuckled dryly, the weight of the situation settling on him. "What? And miss out on another life-threatening adventure? I'm in." Her eyes twinkled just for a moment before she turned back to the bridge crew. "Prepare for phase jump. We go in, find out what's happening, and get out. No one engages unless necessary." The ship lurched as it shifted into phase, the stars outside stretching into lines of light as they entered the rift. The unnatural phenomenon ahead seemed to pulse with energy, and Gabriel couldn't shake the feeling that the Cavani dreadnought was a tiny ship on the verge of being swallowed by something much, much larger. The journey through the rift felt endless. Gabriel stood beside Silve, who remained eerily composed, her eyes focused on the map. She had the look of someone who had seen things that defied comprehension, someone who had already made peace with the unknown. A sharp tone interrupted the silence. "Contact!" an officer called out. "Multiple vessels on the scan." Gabriel's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't supposed to be just a mysterious anomaly. Something was waiting for them. The holographic display flashed, showing the outline of ships, strange angular vessels, darker than the void around them and utterly alien. There were no weapons visible, no sign of crew. They moved in a way that defied logic, flickering between dimensions as if they were not entirely part of the physical world. "Are we being attacked?" Gabriel asked, a sense of unease creeping into his voice. No, Silve answered, her tone unwavering. They're observing. One of the alien ships flickered again, appearing closer in a single blink. Then a voice echoed throughout the bridge, not through the speakers, not through the comms, but directly into their minds, vibrating in their skulls. "You have crossed the threshold," the voice said. It was layered as if many voices spoke at once. "You do not belong here. Leave or be unmade." The crew tensed. Gabriel's pulse quickened. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the threat. Silve's gaze didn't falter. She met the voice, her jaw set. "We are not here to fight," she said, her voice carrying authority. "We seek only to understand." The voice, if it could be called that, responded with a flicker of energy. "Understanding comes with a price." Gabriel looked at Silve, his throat dry. "What does that mean?" he whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to her crew. "Prepare the boarding team. We are going in." The ship shook as another pulse of energy from the alien ships slammed into the Cavani dreadnought. The entire bridge hummed with tension as the crew scrambled to stabilize. Gabriel had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were standing on the edge of something far larger than any battle they had ever faced. The docking bay doors opened with a low hum, and Gabriel was ushered into the room where the boarding team stood ready. Silve led the way, her movements precise, the weight of her decision heavy in the air. The rest of the team followed, their faces set with determination. Gabriel adjusted his grip on the energy pistol he had been given, his heart racing. This wasn't just about surviving a duel anymore. This was about stepping into a realm he couldn't even begin to understand. The alien vessel loomed in front of them now, its surface flickering like a mirage. Gabriel stepped forward, feeling the cold hum of the ship's energy around him. He glanced at Silve one last time, her face unreadable, her eyes sharp as ever. "Stay close," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper against the low hum of the ship. As Gabriel stepped onto the alien craft, he felt a chill run through him. It was nothing like the Cavani dreadnought. The walls here were smooth and shifting, changing shape with each step he took. The very air felt wrong, alive in a way he couldn't explain. There was no clear direction, no path, just an endless twisting maze of space. And then, ahead of them, the air shimmered, and from the depths of the shifting ship, a shape emerged. It was tall, humanoid, but its form flickered and shifted between states of matter, its face an empty void. It spoke again, its voice vibrating directly in Gabriel's mind. "You seek understanding," it intoned, "but you are not ready, not yet." The figure flickered again, and with it, a vision flashed in Gabriel's mind. Something ancient, something powerful, something beyond anything he had ever imagined. And for the first time, Gabriel understood. This was not a battle of strength or endurance. This was a battle of knowledge, of survival in the face of the unknown. And the price of understanding might just be higher than any of them were willing to pay.